Welcome to this character creation guide. Timestamps are below, so let's go. We start right off in the first step in the character creation, which probably is already the biggest decision in the whole process which you are going to make. And this is to either play as a custom character or an origin character. So if we choose to play as a custom character, you have to see it like a blank sheet, an unwritten piece with endless amount of potential. You can make your character, including the appearance, the race, the class, and most important, without any predetermined backstory. Which basically means that the world will know nothing about you and won't react to your past. As you create your own story, and only in relation to that the world will react to you. And this is important. The whole thing changes if you take an origin character, because they are established into the world. They have a deep backstory which is connected to this world. And with each of the backstories, the world will react in certain ways to those characters, which can be in a good or bad way. You have to see it like dialogues, situations and events will be different, suited to the chosen origin character. You have to think about it. You won't be able to control those things as you play as those. Their appearance, character traits, class and all the past is fixed. But only because you decided that you want to play an origin character, that doesn't mean that everything is predetermined. You can still choose how the future of the character looks like or develops. Because only if a character was evil in the past, it doesn't mean that it has to be this way forever. You can still try to make him good. If this will work is another story. Their past is their past. And the future is dependent on what actions you're going to take. Or the only origin character where this is different is the Dark Urge. Because with this character you can basically create and change all of the things you can do on a custom character. You can create his appearance, name, class and so on. The only thing which is the same like the other origin characters is the predetermined backstory. But there is the one thing which is really cool about him and which makes him so fun to play, is that he doesn't remember his own story. So if you play him, you start off in the current situation and you too, as the player, don't know anything about his past. But the world you play in will, and the world will react to this. And while you're playing him, as the name says, he will have some interesting urges, which in his case is the urge to kill, the urge to blood. So this urge will overcome him and you have to play with it or around it. And yeah, it's like the thing you have to consider. What you can also see right at the bottom from each of those characters is a little introduction. And if you press onto this play instruction, you can see a little cinematics regarding the character. You can hear his voice, a few words and so on.
Well met, stranger. You find yourself in the presence of the renowned wizarding prodigy, Gale of Waterdeep. Please, no need to be intimidated.
So the next step are the races. We got 11 different ones to choose from, with some of them offering a sub-race, like the halfling could be a lightfoot halfling or a strong hard halfling, with the human offering, for example, no sub-race. The thing is, why should you choose a specific race? There are a few reasons. The first one, which you probably already know, is just the appearance, because an elf will look different than, for example, a tiefling. And if you want to play just the most baddest character in the whole game, play a dragonborn. I mean, look at him, pretty badass. But there are a few things beside the appearance which you have to consider. Because each of the race has an established lore in the game. So you have to keep this in mind, because if you are in game and you come up to certain situations, the game will maybe react in a different way if you, for example, choose a human, which is the most basic character in the whole universe. Or if you're playing, for example, the Dragonborn, you will become different reactions to those. So the choice of the race is quite important for the reactivity of the world to you. Because a few races, like the Tiefling, has probably a completely other image in this world than, for example, a human. Or maybe an half-orc. or even the Githyanki. I mean, if you're going into main spaces or to common areas where only the other races are, you will get looked at with huge eyes. You have to consider that. If you like that, read the descriptions of each of them. This will be the most important part, and decide which is the most interesting, because each of them will have their own unique playthrough. So another important thing of the races are the racial features. If you go over the races, you will see down here that those things will change with each of the race. If we start right, let's go on to the elf. You can see the elf has a few features like the movement speed, which is 9 meters per turn, which is basically the normal movement speed which all of the characters have, except for the smaller ones, like the halfling for example, with 7.5 meters per turn, or the gnome, which will affect the gameplay a little bit because you can't move that far per turn. So keep that in mind. Or if we look at this one here, the dark vision is a cool feature, because if you are in darker areas or generally the underdark, you can see the area. And if you are playing a character like, for example, the human, which doesn't have this feature, you will have to use maybe spells or a torch or something else to light up the area a little bit. And with dark vision, you are a little bit better prepared. Another thing is some of the racial features are also showing a weapon training. Like here, you can see here that the elf is proficient with the longsword, short sword, shortbow and longbow. And let's pretend that you want to make a build with a longbow. There are some classes, which we will cover then, which maybe also have proficiency with the longbow. So the thing is, maybe you want to take, instead of an elf, a drow if you already know your class, because he will have proficiency in other weapons, so you don't cover the same area. So that is one thing to just keep in mind. So after this, after you chose your race, you can also in the next step see that you can choose a sub-race, as I mentioned earlier. If you go there, you can see, example, for the elf, you could choose the high elf or the wood elf. Each of the subclass comes with a little bit of an extra. For example, like the high elf becomes the firebolt as a cantrip. I explain later what a cantrip is. But he will get some extra thing. The wood elf, for example, would become a little bit faster with an increased movement speed by 1.5 meters. So read through the rest and see what suits you best. What I also want to quick mention is, if I choose my classes, you can on the right side see this character sheet, which will change depending on what we take. For example, if we look right there and we have the elf and I change to the tiefling, you can see that, for example, the armor, the skills change, and it will always give me a quick summary of what I'm proficient with and what skills I have, and so on. If we go back to our dear window here, we can see that the next part would be already that we choose our class. So in this game we have 12 different classes to choose from. And with each of the classes they have subclasses with a total of 46 different ones. But one thing you have to consider right away, for example, if we go on to the Paladin, we can choose our subclass right in the beginning. For other classes, like the Bard for example, this window here disappears. Paladin, it is here. Paladin, it is gone. That means that we have to level up a little bit until we reach the point of where we can choose our subclass. For example, if we play a Bard, that would be level 3. If we play a Wizard, this would be level 2. So you just have to level up and then choose it while playing. And if we stay, let's say, at a Rogue, for example, we can go on him and we can see underneath here that the same process as with the racial features you will get with the race and the racial features, you will get a little description here. And right next to it, which can be quite interesting to look at, is a detail box. And if we click on it, we can see that, for example, what things the rogue is good at or what he is proficient in. For example, you can see the weapons. One thing which isn't there is, for example, is the longbow. And if we want for whatever reason to play with a longbow, then you could choose, if we go back to the race, to the elf and see, okay, he has proficiency in longbow. So you could combine that, as I mentioned earlier. So what you can see next, under this whole detail area and so on, each of the class will have certain features and certain abilities regarding the class they can use. And those could be like, for a bard, the cantrips, spells, an action and a class feature. Or if you just go to the rogue, they only get an action. It depends on which class you take. But just to give you a quick overview of, for example, the rogue, he's like the stealthy hiding character, which when he attacks in a certain situation, he can deal extra damage. Or if we go to the barbarian, he has an action as the rogue and a class feature. And the action for him would be rage, which just makes him stronger and more resistant in a battle. And if you look at the class feature, he also gets unarmored defense, which just means that while you're not wearing armor, you can add your constitution modifier to your armor class. So those features are always in regards to which class you take. So go through them, look at what catches your interest, and then have a deeper look, because if we would go now over everything, I can assure you we wouldn't get to an end with this video, and it is better to get, at least for the classes, a little bit of an overview and why you should take what, and just a few things to know. For example, if we go to the cleric, you can see on the left side the whole things are always changing, and the cleric, he can, for example, choose cantrips here. He can choose spells, he can choose, or he has a class feature. But for example, as I mentioned earlier, he can also choose here the subclass, and for the cleric there's also another additional thing, which is the deity, which is basically just a god in the world of Baldur Gate 3. So you could just read through all of them, and this will have an influence for certain situations and dialogues or something. But probably the most important thing here, because I mentioned it earlier, because we have in this game, if you're intrigued to play a spellcaster, you should know that there are prepared spellcasters and known spellcasters, which basically means that if you, for example, go to a cleric, if you go to the cleric, you can see down here that you can choose spells, and on the left side are prepared spells, which just means that you have a bunch of spells in this list you can choose from. And if you think, okay, you don't want to take this, you can just change them out. The main thing is, those are the prepared spells. So basically in game, this would be like, okay, you prepare those spells, you choose the ones you would like, and if you go in battle, you have then those spells you prepared to fight with. And during battle, you won't be able to change them, but outside of battle, you can, for example, if you lost the battle and you want to do it again, and maybe with other spells, you can just exchange them, prepare others, and try it again. Those are like the prepared casters. But then we have also the known casters, which work a little bit different, like the warlock. You can see here on the left side, the prepare spells field is gone, and instead there's now a spells field. And in this spells field, we can learn 2 spells in this class right now. So if it would take, for example, Burning Hands and Command, we would learn those 2 spells, and all the others are gone. So we can only take those 2 for our game until we level up and learn more spells on the go. So those are things you should consider, because if you want to play a spellcaster, just make sure which kind of spellcaster you are. Because as I mentioned, if you take the warlock and then just take any of the spells here, you won't see the others until you level up, and it would be a little bit annoying to have to wait till you get those you maybe saw but wasn't quite sure, etc. And the next thing which is there, which are the cantrips. Basically, most of the classes have some cantrips, like Warlock can choose 2, the Bard can choose 2 cantrips, the Sorcerer can choose 4, Wizard 3, Ranger 1. And what you have to think about, the cantrip is like a spell just without any costs. Because in game, if you use spells, because you will have a limited amount of spells you can use, because in game you will only have a limited amount of spells you can use. For example, if you are in combat and you have a level 1 spell, which would be like this magic missile here, and there it says level 1 spell slot, you have, for example, in game 2 level 1 spell slots, and if you use 2 spells which are a level 1 spell, you won't be able to use any spells for the rest of the combat. But the cantrips here are basically a spell, but without this level 1 spell slot, so you can use this every round how often you would like without any punishment. So after we chose our class, we can go to the next step, which is the background. And the background is basically going to do things for your character. The first one will be to give you proficiency in 2 skills, which just means that if you, for example, take the criminal, you can see down here the skills you get. You would get in deception a +2 and in stealth a +3. And basically a proficiency just means that you get +2 on your rolls in game. So why is it not saying +2 if you're just proficient in this? Why is it saying +3 on stealth? You have to imagine that the +3 is like the total of what you get. This is like the proficiency, which is the +2. In addition to that, you will get the modifier you have in your class. I will come to that in a second, but first, let me show you something, because if I look at the +3 here, I could go to my abilities and reset every one of them to just 10, which is like the baseline of every character, which is like 0 everywhere, okay? And then if I go back to background and go to criminal, you see that stealth is now +2 because I am proficient in this skill, but only without any additional bonus. So it is just a +2. The proficiency bonus will also increase in the time you're playing the game, which will be on level 5 you will get a +3, and on level 9 you will get a +4. Just so you know. The background will also give you something which is called the inspiration system, the inspiration point system in this game, which just means if you, for example, take the entertainer and you are going to play the game with the entertainer how it's supposed to be because you're really role-playing it, you will get each time you do something which is in regards to this area an inspiration point. And with this inspiration point, you can use them to re-roll in certain situations. If you couldn't pass this ability check, you could, if you in the past did one entertainer moment and got an inspiration point, you could use that to re-roll it and maybe now pass the check. And just so you know, you can have a max amount of 4 inspiration points. So use them if you're full, okay? After we chose our background, we are going to the abilities. And the abilities are just going to determine in what things your character is going to be really strong and weak. And in which skills you are good, which we, for example, just talked about. If we go to the background and let's just take the noble, and if you want to be really good in persuasion skills, so like talking our way out of in conversations or something, you could increase this by just pumping up the charisma score. And if we go back to noble, you see it is now a +4 instead of a +2. So which just means that each roll in the game you get 2 additional, or in this case 4 additional points on your roll. It just depends on which points you're going to pump up. But the main thing here is you should choose them in regards to which character you are playing or which class you are playing. And for example, I chose right now the barbarian class, and the barbarian class is like a melee character which really goes in, so he wants to be more into the strength area. What you can also do, if you're not sure for what class and so on you should pick what, you can use the recommended tab. And if you click on this, it will just provide you with a possible good distribution of the points regarding the class. And as you can see here, the barbarian is mostly a strength character. It gave us 17 points on strength. But let's just have a quick look over them, because if you are hovering over each of those things here, you can see what they're good at. For example, the strength is good for muscles and physical power, affects your melee weapons and how far you can jump. Dexterity is like the opposite. Dexterity scales with ranged weapons, but also finesse weapons, which just means finesse weapons are also close-up weapons, and they scale with either dexterity or strength, depending if the dexterity is higher. So if you're playing a ranged character and you also want to be close-up pretty good, you have to choose a finesse weapon, because both things, the ranged and the close-up, will scale up with your dexterity, so you don't have to pump out strength and dexterity. It also has 2 more important things, which is like the increasement of your armor class. So the higher the dexterity, the better your armor class, which just improves your defense. It also affects your initiative, which is really important because this one determines on which place you go in game on the start of a battle. So each start of the battle, everyone rolls a dice, and the higher your initiative is, the earlier you come, and the earlier you are, the higher the possibilities that you maybe can take out an enemy without even getting their chance to do anything, which is amazing. Next of the Constitution. This one directly affects your hit points. The higher the Constitution modifier means, the more hit points will be added on top of your class's based hit points. And it will also helps you hold concentration and concentration spells. And if you go to Intelligence, you can see that it is, for example, a skill which really improves the spell casting for a wizard. So the higher you are having your Intelligence, the better your spell casting for the wizards are going to be. So the Wisdom is also like Intelligence, it scales with spellcasting for clerics, druids and rangers instead of wizards. Then Charisma, same again, it also improves the spellcasting, this time for bards, paladins, sorcerers, warlocks and so on. So you have to always think about which of those skills are necessary for each of the spellcasters, because if you're playing, for example, a bard, you want charisma and not intelligence. But what also charisma does is, as I mentioned earlier, you can persuade others in dialogues and so on. So it's just a nice skill to have, if you of course need it for this certain class. So, and generally speaking, depending on which class you take, or you probably want to buff the primary ability the most. And depending on which secondary abilities, because each class, for example, let's take the wizard, which uses intelligence to scale its spells, but it also needs dexterity for its armor class. So you just have to think about it, that you don't just push everything in intelligence and then a little bit in charisma and completely leave out dexterity, because it is one of the most important abilities in the whole game. So the next thing what is important to think about are the modifiers. The modifiers are like the thing which I talked about earlier. If you go to the background noble, you can see that the persuasion is +2. And this is because I am proficient through the background in persuasion, yeah? But if I would go to charisma and pump this up for 2, I would get a +1 modifier. So instead of +2, I would get the +3. So those modifiers are important for the whole game, because depending on which skills, for the barbarian, let's say the strength, and you make a melee attack, you don't want this to have a 0 to strength checks. You want this to have a +3 to strength checks or higher. And the thing is, you have to consider here is you only get another +1 to your ability or strength checks, whatever, for every even number. If you're odd, like the 17, you will have a +3. On the 16, you will have a +3. So make sure that you distribute your points quite good and not making everything odd. But what you can do, which isn't that bad, is, for example, that you push strength to 17. So you basically wasted 2 +1 checks, yeah? But if you play the game at level 4, at level 8 and at level 12, you will get feats. Noting that you only get those feats if you are in the corresponding class this level. If you multi-class and you have an, let's say, level 3 bard and a level 2 warlock, you won't get that feat. So you have to be level 4 for the specific class, like the barbarian we are now playing. If we are reaching this level, we will get a feat, and a feat will improve our character even more. So it makes sense that we maybe keep the 17 and the 15, because we could take the ability score feat and at level 4 push both scores up to 16 and to 17, and then we have a +4 in strength checks and a +2 in constitution checks, which is amazing. So this is one thing you can consider. So all of this really depends on which class you are playing, because the barbarian is just go in, bash everyone, you can distribute your points to the main area. But if you're playing, for example, a paladin, which has attack which has spells, which also needs dexterity for his abilities. You have to spread those points a little bit more. So just look at what things you're having in each class and distribute them correspondingly. Or if you're doing a specific build or something and not playing the main thing the class provides, then you specifically have to look into it, because then the recommended choice could be just not the best option for you. So at the last point, if we are done with our ability points distribution, we can also change our proficiencies, which are basically just proficiencies you're giving your character to specify it even more. And since we are right now having a barbarian equipped, which is mainly a strength character, we probably want something like athletics. So we can put this right here and give him this skill proficiency. And then you can just look what you want. For maybe if you would play a rogue, you probably want stealth for this proficiency, and so on. So it just depends on how much you want to power your character up, or if you just want more of the role-playing thingy and maybe you want to talk with animals or handle animals better, then you can also take this. It doesn't really matter, because of course you could just push everything into the barbarian skills, but if you want to be a barbarian and also want to talk a little bit to animals, why not? Take it. So it really depends how you want to play it. So those are basically all the things you are going to go through and which you have to consider. And if you're done, or you can also do this right at the beginning or midway through, depending on whenever you want to do it, you can edit your appearance. Create your dream character, your custom character, whatever. Do whatever you want.